One mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 7 of HBO's Winning Time, entitled Invisible Man. I'm going to get to the episode title in a little bit, but I want to start with the first of what we see as the main two plot lines in this episode, that being the plot line with Paul/Pat/Jack, and then the plot line with Magic. I'm going to start with the coaching situation with Paul. So it's been a few weeks since Jack's accident. The Lakers are on a really bad skid. They're getting blown out by teams they should beat. The team doesn't respect Paul. They question his decisions. They talk back. There's even a scene where Spencer Haywood shit talks Paul to the media, which shows a lack of respect as well. And we find out that it looks like the Lakers are discussing bringing in Abdul-Jabbar to coach the team as a replacement. The problem here is that they either need to go with Jack or they need to go in a different direction. Jack's recovering. He's struggling to tie shoes, so he's not really quite, he's not even close to being there. But they do have a nice moment where you could tell that somehow basketball invigorates him. Like when he was in the coma, I was saying, whichever episode that was, I think that was last week, I was saying like the strategizing for David Thompson almost seemed to be how he passed time while he was in his coma, and coming to a resolution is what brought him out of it. And now we see him struggling to tie shoes, but then when Bus comes in and starts talking about this upcoming road trip against the Pacers, my Pistons, and the Celtics, you see Jack get more energetic. He gets up out of the bed, and we just get another example of how much basketball moves him and motivates him. But the decision essentially lies in, if you want to stay with Jack, if you're Jerry Buss and you want to stay with Jack, you're kind of banking on him being better at some point, because he says he can't win under Paul. And if he sticks with Jack, then that means he has to stick with Paul, especially if Jack can't come back. Then he's stuck with Paul for the rest of the season, and he doesn't think he can win with Paul at the helm. Conversely, you have Abdul-Jabbar, who is being discussed as someone who can be brought in to coach the team as well. So Jack essentially says, give Paul through this road trip, the 3 games that I just mentioned, and we'll see kind of what happens there. Paul knows that there is, I wouldn't even necessarily say a search, but he knows that they're looking in other directions as far as potential coaches, but instead he lies to Pat Riley about this, says that, once Jack comes back, Riley can stay on the team, stay on the coaching staff, and he asked Pat Riley to be his assistant. Pat's like, I want to make sure this is good because I don't want to quit my job as a color commentator. And then now Jack comes back as assistant. I'm assistant coach. Jack comes back. Now you're assistant. Now I'm out of 2 jobs. And Paul lies directly to him and is like, no, that's not the case, but it is. And Pat agrees to join as his assistant. And his assistant kind of works in like a dual role here. He's an assistant as far as, the actual coaching of the game, but he's also an assistant for Paul's mentality. I said, Paul's very beat up. He's very mentally. He's very defeated mentally. He's just not going anywhere. The Lakers are losing. Like I said, no respect from the team. Getting back talked, doesn't know how many timeouts they have left, things like that, how many fouls a player has. He has someone foul, and then it turns out they fouled out of the game. He's just doing a real bad job, and Pat is also there to kind of be his assistant coach from a mental aspect. There's several times where you see him kind of like dispensing some tough love on Paul to kind of help get his head back in the game. He gives really great advice on how to get Spencer Haywood back on board, which it seems like he kind of ignored. But there's an interesting situation as far as Westhead goes, where like I said, we hear Spencer Haywood kind of like shit talking him to the media, and Pat's like, you gotta do something. Like, you can't let this happen. Like, this, everyone's gonna lose respect for you. And we find out that Paul actually was holding a grudge over what the conversation that he overheard in the hospital from Haywood, and that he did bench him, and he has been keeping him there just out of pure stubbornness and idiocy. And later, when they played the Celtics, Spencer Haywood gets put into the game and does his, I can't say his best impersonation of the bad boy Pistons because we weren't a thing yet at that point. But yeah, he comes in and he shows why he needs to be in the game. But I like how we find out, well, not we find out, Pat finds out that Elgin Baylor is coming in and essentially could potentially cost him his job, his second job, because Elgin Baylor just called the wrong room. Like he was meaning to call Jerry West, and he called Pat instead. Well, Paul instead. And there's there's an interesting. Oh fuck! Did I forget it? Oh no, yeah, I remember now. I wanted to point out that I thought it was interesting that. I don't know, interesting, but I don't know. I just like recognizing people. But Orlando Jones plays Elgin Baylor, and it's another situation where like, oh, I didn't know Orlando Jones played a role on this show. So I thought that was pretty cool. So the other main plot line here is involving Magic and the rivalry between him and Larry Bird. And we see Larry Bird for the first time in this episode. And I can't help but wonder, again, just how accurate this depiction of Larry Bird is. You know, he was called the Hick from French Lick, but I don't know how much of a hick he was. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, like in 1979, was Larry Bird like a 6, a 7 in real life? Because on this show, he's a fucking 10. And, you know, we see him, he's got tobacco chew in his mouth. He's spitting into like a beer can. He's got on like cowboy boots. He looks like he smells. And, he's walking down the hall and there's just like he walks down the hall and passes Magic without acknowledging him. And there's like a big graphic on there that just says, you know my fucking name. Like, and then he gets into this press conference. He's giving the shortest possible answers. They say, what are you going to do in this game? We're going to play the game. Like giving these short, one word, one sentence answers. Magic is being charismatic, and still, once Larry Bird leaves, the whole media goes with him. Like, even though he's treating them like shit, they still adore him. And there's a great scene where I think everybody's probably going to talk about this scene. It's one of the stronger scenes of the season, where Magic and Kareem talk in the locker room of the Garden before the game, and Magic's pissed off. And this is where I think the title comes into play, Invisible Man. Kareem says, you know, this reminds me of the Invisible Man. And Magic's like, the movie? And he's like, yeah, but there's a book too. I really like that. But he basically explains the idea of like, you know, no matter what he does as a black man, even if it's equal to or better than what Bird does as a white man, they're never going to see him. They're always going to see Bird, and they're going to give Bird the adoration and accolades that Magic has earned and deserves, and they're essentially going to ignore him as a black man. That's just the plight of the black man, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. But they have this conversation, and Magic's like, you know, I've done so much to make it so that I am seen, you know, so that people don't just look past me. But now I get here and I'm facing this guy, Larry Bird, who I just beat in the NCAA championship, and he's still getting all of the accolades and respect and the eyeballs, and I'm still getting ignored when I'm here with him. And then Kareem's like, well, what you need to do is you need to beat his ass, you know, win this game. And he's like, is that going to make him like me? And he's like, no, they'll double down on what they say about Bird. They're going to ignore you, but that silence is power. And I love that scene. It was a great conversation, and I think it was a great moment in what I hope will be a shift in Magic and Kareem's dynamic on the show, and what I also hope was a shift in real life. Like if they were at each other's throats to start their careers together, I hope that they had a situation like that where they started to see eye to eye and work better together, not just on the court, but just as teammates, as people, as men, as humans. So. Yeah, I thought that was a great conversation. That was a great scene. I have another scene I want to talk about with Kareem in a little bit, but Magic also goes to see Cookie. They come to town to play the Pistons. Obviously, they're in Lansing. Lansing, for those who aren't from here, Lansing is about an hour and a half west of Detroit, so it's not a huge hike or anything like that. And they have an interesting situation where Magic has like a Christmas kind of like get together for family and friends. Some of the players are there. Everyone's having a good time. And Cookie doesn't show up. But Cookie later shows up to his hotel room, and he comes to the door in a robe, and she kind of gives, you know, the where do we stand? I don't know what we are. I don't know who I am to you. And he gives her his typical Magic kind of like, you know, you Cookie, you're everything to me, your family, you're basically everything. and they start to make out. They look like they're gonna have sex, but Cookie has to leave, and then she leaves, and her fucking friend comes out of the bathroom, and that like my jaw dropped because like even though this show has been very heavy-handed with their with the idea of Magic being I don't want to say a womanizer, but like, you know, spreading himself thin when it comes to fucking. Like the show has been very clear with that. It's almost like they poke us in the head, like you in case you forgot. Magic likes to fuck a lot of women. They do like every week. It's actually a little like you can lay off on it. We get it, but they do that. And they've leaned into that, but even then, it was still a surprise for Cookie's friend to be there. Like, both of them, like, grade A pieces of shit. That friend and Magic, real bad. But that's the immaturity of Magic. You know, he's every time Cookie has done something to hurt him, he's overreacted and lashed out at her. Like that phone call, I think it was last week or the week before, where he snapped on her, and then now she doesn't show up to his little get-together, and now he fucks her friend. Like that's how you get down. But yeah, really bad stuff from Magic. But there's a few other things that I want to talk about from this episode that are just a little bit outside of the Paul storyline and the Magic storyline. So I'm gonna glance over here. So there's another interesting scene involving Kareem where he has a conversation with Magic's father at the aforementioned get together. And I read one article that called this a heartwarming scene. That's not what I took from it. So earlier in the scene, we see Magic and his father kind of not going at it, but having a little bit of a disagreement over how they're going to handle this deal with Buick. The father's like, the word on the line is that Buick is shit. I don't think you should do this deal. And he's like, me and Dr. Day already signed the deal. Like, we're good. And he doesn't like the fact that Dr. Day is kind of stepping in and taking on this role as Magic's like advisor. And there's another really heavy-handed scene where you see Magic and Dr. Day discussing everything that's going to happen and how great everything is. They're having a good old time, and then you just see his father in the background looking mad. Like he comes into the picture, and he's just standing there looking mad and menacing. I'm like, this is so fucking corny. Like, okay, I picked up via the conversation between Magic and his father that the father was jealous. I didn't need the super obvious, like, look how jealous he is in the background. So then he goes to meet with, he goes to sit down at the dinner table, and Kareem is there by himself, and he goes to sit down with Kareem, and he's telling him, like, how great Kareem is and all this good stuff. And eventually the conversation works toward Kareem saying, it's amazing to me how positive and happy Magic is all the time. Has your son always been like this? He's like, yeah. And in short, Kareem kind of asked, like, why do you think it is that the plight that black people experience in this country at this time, not 1979, like everything that's going on that impacts Kareem emotionally and mentally so much, how Magic seems impervious to it. And that scene resonated with me so much, that at least that moment, because that's how I feel today. There's so many fucked up things going on in the world, and they impact me as an empath, like emotionally and mentally, where I'm just so angry all the time. And part of that anger is not just the treatment of black people in this country, but it's other people's obliviousness to it or complicitness in it. And like all of that drives me nuts. So I totally vibe with everything Kareem was saying here. And it was 43 years ago. Like, like this is a long time for this shit to still be fucking going on. But don't get me started on that. But the conversation kind of evolves into a thing where it's like, yeah, make sure you if he gets out of line, you get him together. And I'm thinking like the person who wrote the article looked at that as like, almost kind of like make sure you take good care of him. And Kareem's like, you got it. That did not read that way to me. That read like a jealous and scorned father who's mad that his son has formed a bond as an advisor with another man who now kind of is being vindictive. Like he wants Kareem to be hard on him to straighten him out. And it doesn't feel like it's for Magic's own good. It feels like, I'm sure there's a bit of that, but it feels mostly like he's just being petty. And he's mad that Magic has formed this relationship with this other guy. Because he goes as far as going to say, like, matter of fact, if you whoop his ass, it would be a favor to me. I consider it a favor. And Kareem's like, you got it. And both of them seemed immature in that scene to me. I didn't take anything positive from that other than the fact that I related to the conversation. But like his father looked petty and vindictive, and that's why he wanted Kareem to beat Magic's ass, like, to be hard on him. And Kareem readily agreed to it because he doesn't like how Magic is. Magic annoys him. So like, of course he's gonna agree to that. So like, I took away from that scene that we saw two people who feel just spurred by Magic, and they just kind of want an excuse to kind of just like push back on him and poke at him and be hard on him. So like, I thought that scene was interesting. I took a very negative look at the way the two of them behaved in that conversation, and I read an article that looked at it as a positive. I don't know if you thought it was a positive, you viewer, let me know. But like that seemed like petty vindictiveness and men who need to grow up, not guys who were just like looking out for their son or looking out for their pal. Another thing that I thought was a little bit heavy-handed and kind of corny. I'm not going to call it heavy-handed because, so I'm going to take that back. I'm going to take that part of it back, but I do think it's corny. Is, like I mentioned earlier, Pat Riley is all over Paul throughout this episode, trying to get him to stand up for himself, which he does in that Celtics game. Get him to stand up for himself, get him to be more assertive and make the team respect him and give the team respect. And he's just doing this kind of tough love thing. And he tosses him into the shower and he's spraying him with cold water. And then everybody's getting wet. And then Pat gets up and he slicks his hair back. And that was to be our, I guess, indication that maybe this was the start of the look that became iconic that Pat Riley had throughout his career. And I say it's not heavy-handed because it's not a situation where the viewer already should know this or pick it up through context, and they're just like hammering it home, like, look at this, we're telling you something, check this out. It's just like for those of us who know what Pat Riley, what his quote-unquote classic look looked like, I thought it was just kind of corny to like be super obvious with it, and then like have me looking at this situation like, you're telling me this is how his look originated, like how he changed his look. It was like a weird kind of like Joker thing almost. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of strange. I thought it was funny that Rick Barry makes a almost like a background appearance in this episode, and you could tell it's Rick Barry because of the underhanded free throw. So I thought that was kind of cool. I thought it was interesting that when they got the Boston Garden, one, it was filthy. I don't know if that's true. If Boston Garden was like really just that fucking nasty, but if it is, that's interesting. But it could just be this way's show of taking yet another swipe at the Celtics, because that rivalry still exists to this day for sure. But Red Auerbach has Jerry Buss sitting in the fucking last row at the very top, and then he sends him a gift, and they open it up, and the guy who brought it to him, this like usher, goes, "It's a vegetable like your coach." I thought, wow, like that was really cruel. Like, but I mean, maybe back then in 1979, like we're way more fucking sensitive in 2022 than in 1979, and that might have just been like good-natured ribbing, and then Buss goes, that fucking asshole, and he forgets it. Red Auerbach will get canceled for that in 2022. And then lastly, I wanted to point out how everything about the Lakers in this episode was fabricated. Like, they didn't go on that bad of a losing streak. They didn't get blown. They didn't even play the Pacers, Pistons, and Celtics in a road trip that ended around that had them playing the Pistons on Christmas. That didn't happen. They beat the. I think I read they were like 4-0 against the Pacers and Pistons that season. Like they did not lose to the Pacers and Pistons. That game against the Celtics did not go that way. It was actually a pretty decisive victory. I think the Lakers won by, I was like close to 20 points. Like it wasn't like a nail biter like this episode made you think. And I wondered why they were so liberal with the reality here, especially in certain situations. It makes sense, right? Like, you want to build up this drama surrounding the coach. So it's like, it makes sense to have, they've established McKinney as the guy, and they've established Westhead as kind of a fuck up. So if you really want to sell the idea that Westhead is a fuck up, of course you make the Lakers go on this ridiculous losing skid, which they didn't, but neither here nor there. But you can get that for the purposes of like the drama. But what I didn't get is why I'm not gonna say what I didn't get, but what I took away from it. This is why I think they did it this way. I think the game against the Celtics is kind of meant to be like one game, and they've done this before, because I said I said this I think earlier in this season on a video where I said that like I felt like I think it was last week actually. Dr. Day's daughter Cindy is not a real person. And I said that I felt like the Cindy character was kind of meant to embody all of the women that Magic constantly had going in and out of his, I was going to say life, but probably bedroom, in and out of his bedroom. I think this game against Boston is the same idea. Like, this isn't a real game that happened. Like, these events aren't real. But I think it's kind of meant to show overall what the Lakers-Celtics rivalry was like. It was kind of like a encapsulation of all of that rivalry. Because you have referees making bad calls, and you got the Lakers, you got Chick Hearn talking about the calls are bad. You got the Celtics announcer talking about just letting them play like everything's fine. You have the chippiness, the fighting, the tension. That's all real. That happened, but it didn't happen in like one game. That was just like the nature of that rivalry. Those guys would go at it. I saw a clip on Twitter the other day, and I don't remember what the context for this was, but it was a clip of like Lakers Celtics like fights, and like you see Kurt Rambis getting elbowed, you see Larry Bird hitting people, you see Kareem hitting people. It's all out of control. But this is like the nature of that rivalry, and I think that's what this game was meant to represent. The game was close, just like the rivalry is close and heated. Like I said, all the fights, all that kind of stuff. So that's why I think they were, I can't even say a little bit liberal, why they completely made up shit for this game. But I still thought it was actually pretty cool. And that's how I chose to look at it when I found out that all wasn't realistic. That's how I chose to look at it. And I think that's what it is. It's just, again, taking a whole picture in. So I enjoyed this episode. I think this show is still pretty interesting. I enjoy watching it every week. I think there's 10 episodes. So we still have a ways to go. I'm still intensely curious about what the long-term plan. Because like I said, I assumed this was going to be a one-season limited series kind of deal. And now it feels like it could be multiple seasons. Because I think I watched the preview for next week, and I think they're talking about being around like the All-Star break or something like that. So, I mean, All-Star break in the first season. All-Star break would have been at the beginning of 1980. There's a long way to go here. So we'll see what happens, but I'm enjoying this season. I think this is a fun show, and I will see you guys next week for episode 8. Peace.